Good afternoon. It's Monday, bank holiday, Easter Monday, the 6th of April. I'm very grateful to Beth, Denise, and Esther for joining me on a holiday. But we're writers, so do we have a holiday? We work the day that ends in Y, generally, don't we? Although I did have a day off with family, so that was lovely. Behind me, if you're wondering what these are the goodie bags. Are in person, and all four of us will be there. Our in-person festival is 3 weeks yesterday, and I am currently like a swan. So the top half that you can see on Zoom is chilled, mellow, everything's in control, and the bottom half of me. So we're here to talk about beginnings. Welcome, Beth. Welcome, Denise. Welcome, Esther. Lovely to have you. Unfortunately, we had to lose. We didn't have to, but Martin had plans with family, and unfortunately, Carl. I originally set up the Monday mini fest, staggered throughout the day for different time zones, and then decided, because it was just easier to have a single time, to make the Monday midday mini fest. So here we are at midday, and unfortunately Carl wasn't able to make it today. So hopefully something else, a Tuesday or a Thursday, because they're 6 o'clock in the evening. So we shall get cracking on beginnings. Beth, we'll go alphabetically to start with, and then who knows, anybody who wants to say something. So I don't know whether you can answer this question. For you, what should a beginning do or not do?
Well, as a writer, creative writing courses taught me that the beginning must provide a real bang, a real wow factor for the reader. And so my novel starts with a conclusion to a battle, and the hero of the book committing an act of violence for which he is immediately uh, very remorseful. Um, and that is the inciting moment, because he feels he's got to change from having been this successful military man to being a peace builder. And that gives him his quest for the rest of the book.
Yeah.
But as a reader, I'm not so convinced that I always want this when I'm reading. I One of my favorite authors is George Orwell, and virtually all of his novels start with an ordinary everyday scene.
Mm.
There are hints in that scene that something is not quite right and something is going to happen, but he does keep you waiting for the inciting moment. And I'm quite okay with that slow build up.
Mm.
Um, it's a beginning because you are drawn into the world of the protagonist immediately,
Mm.
their everyday existence. Whilst, of course, as I say, there are these just very subtle hints that this everyday existence is going to be seriously challenged in some
Mm.
way.
Well, he's a great example, because isn't it 1984 that starts off? It was a cold bright day in April, and the clock struck 13.
Interestingly enough, I was going to suggest this. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13.
Yes.
Winston Smith, his chin nuzzled into his breast in an effort to escape the vile wind, slipped quickly through the glass doors of Victory Mansions, though not quickly enough to prevent a swirl of gritty dust from entering along with him. And it then goes on to describe the musty smells. It's very kind of Soviet bloc, dank and grey,
Mm.
living conditions. Um,
Is that all one sentence, the sentence you wrote out? Or is the
uh,
clock strikes 13
Two
stops?
sentences,
Ah, right. So it stops at strikes 13
13,
and
yes.
then carries on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's another thing. Do we want a short, snappy introduction, or do you want some kind of? Does it matter if it's too long? So Denise, for you, what should a beginning do or not do?
Well, obviously, I know that all the textbooks and the creative writing courses say you start with an introduction, introduce the characters and all the background, but you also have to introduce a hook. So I always think I agree with Beth. What better hook than to have the murder? And if I'm writing my cozy crime novels, because I do true crime, cozy crime, and what else do I do? I've forgotten. Oh, espionage fiction. But if I'm doing the cozy crime, obviously in most cases, the body is found. You don't witness the murder. It's the
Mm.
murder happens off the page. But I do like an opening line that is the hook and tells you that there's a murder. So something, I haven't used this, but something like it was raining heavily the day Agatha's body was found. So
Mm.
you know right away what's coming. And then you can gradually drip in the introduction. Agatha had been 55 years old and working, blah, blah, blah. And the person who found her, so and so, so and so. So I like to grab the reader by the throat as soon as, the opening is there. Um, because I think I said this last time, and I won't mention the name, a very, very well-known thriller, which has been filmed, and it's a whole series, and it's amazing. And the first book in the series, the first 84 pages, nothing happens whatsoever. It's all about backstory and background and introduction.
Mm.
And I actually gave up on it, and everyone said it's the best novel of all time. You mustn't. And then someone last week said he gets better after the first book.
Right.
But I mean, he is the thriller writer.
Mm.
Uh, and I just thought 84 pages, and what's happened? There's no murder, there's no kidnapping, there's no crime.
No.
So I like to make it plain at the beginning what kind of, death there is going to be and who it is, and then gradually drip in the facts that people might be interested in.
Because I think when we write, isn't it tempting just to splurge on the page, and then we get to about chapter three, and because quite often when I get sent books to edit, the action starts on chapter three, and you think
Hmm.
there's a lot of introducing the character and what they've been doing, and then all of a sudden this
Hmm.
is what, certainly for rookie authors, that's often debuts. That's often what happens. So for his first book, it sounds as if it's just been, if it's traditionally published, it sounds like it is. It's just been picked up like that, and no editor has thought to
Hmm.
chop out the first, or at least chop most of it out and interweave some of it irrelevant parts thereafter.
Hmm.
Esther, you write for children. Do you find how would you um, want a beginning to be for children?
I think it's a little bit different. And the books I've got are for 5 to 7 year olds. So, they need to know the character, but also just I give them like a sense that something is going to happen. So, it's whereas I do also write short stories. I do so, edit and I do tutor as well. And so again, like Beth and Denise were saying, you do sort of, you do need a hook of some kind. Because, like you, Denise, I have read books and I've given up because you think, is anything going to happen? It just seems as though there's so much backstory and so much and I spoke like you, Morgan, because you edit as well. If you do read, you need something that's really going to grab you and really keep you reading. So a lot of my reading matter in my own time is like that. I need to have something that's really going to grab me. But it is interesting, like Beth said, about also liking that sort of slow build up. And I know readers like that, but there's also, nowadays, again, we're told that attention spans aren't so long, and so you do need to capture readers. But I think it depends. I think it's very much up to the individual what they like. But with regards going back to children, I think it's a bit different. And also, I'm writing. I've got my second book in the series coming out soon. Any day I should have it. And again, it's having to, with that second book, so that readers know, especially with children, they need that little bit of background, but also they've got to be interested. So it is the balance of it, as well. So it's a bit different. I've approached that differently to how I would writing for adults, as well. It's sort of bearing that in mind.
Skipping a bit to the question about genre, but I'm reading Cassandra Clare book at the moment.
Yeah, I've read hers, yes.
Um, and in fantasy novels or series, I mean, they are so big, um, and there is a lot of backstory. I mean, in the one I'm reading, I mean, the prologue alone is 35 pages, in which something significant happens. But that's the prologue, and because you're in a fantasy world, different geography, different history, different name types. Uh, it is, I think, well, maybe it's just me. I just find that compared to when I read a cozy crime, um, I'm quite happy to go off in all these different directions to find out context of what the book is about and where it's going.
Mm. Does she, can you remember, I don't know if you have it to hand, does she use the word prologue?
Yes, yes,
Right. Because when I'm editing, and if I get sent a book that says prologue, I have a little, I have a checklist document, and I come across, it's very rare that I come across something I haven't seen before and don't have a comment already to hand for it. And I say it's not the author's fault, but some readers, and I used to not read prologues, won't read them if it's titled prologue. So I say, well, have a date and a location. So it could be something even like London present day or Edinburgh 1965, something like that, so that you know when and where we are. Or even England. It doesn't have to be specific, because if you don't want the reader to know exactly where they are, then to give something away. But some hint. And then if you just title the prologue the date, era, and vague location, they're going to read it because they think that's the beginning of the book. And then they get to chapter one. And I say no more than 500 words for a prologue, because if people see that it's a couple of pages, oh, that's fine. But they won't know that it's not chapter one, because it doesn't say prologue. So they read it regardless, and then realise that they've just read a prologue, because then they get to chapter one, which then could be either continuing or going back. We've had a flashback or a flash forward, and then we get to chapter one, and they've read it. So yes, how do you react to prologues, Esther?
I don't mind them at all. I think because ever since as a reader when I was younger, I've read books with prologues. So I think, again, it's something that I'm used to. But I completely agree with they've got to be short. And I do see, there's less labeling them as prologue, nowadays. But also, I wouldn't want to, even if it was headed up prologue, miss it, because it might set you up for something later, or there's all sorts of reasons. So I don't understand the thinking why people wouldn't read them.
No,
But there you go.
I compare it to the introduction in a non-fiction book, where I mean, they are very different beasts, but the introduction is this is why I've written the book. This is my expertise, and then you've got the factual information. But I say that to the author. I said, it's not your fault that some people don't read it. But when I teach a planning and writing novel course for Northamptonshire Council, we'd have sort of anywhere between 16 and 18 students. And invariably, when we had when we were talking about beginnings, I asked, and I ran this off every term for 4 years. And I said, is there anybody here who doesn't read prologues? And with, I think, with two exceptions, there was always one person in, even in only 16 to 18 people, there would be one person who doesn't read prologues. And I say to the author, it's not your fault, but you are running the risk of somebody not reading it. And then if you're containing vital information that the reader should know, then I think to be safe, call it something else. Denise, do you use prologues in your books?
No, certainly no. In my fiction, as I said, I like there to be a body on the first page, so I want to go straight to the horror of it. Even though it's cozy crime, there's got to be a body in the library. But I certainly use introductions in my non-fiction. And sometimes when you're reading non-fiction, the introduction is actually written by a friend of the author and is bigging the book up, and that kind of annoys me. So. I have a quick speed read of a prologue, and if it's, somebody famous saying how great this book is, then I'll just ignore it. But for example, in my book, The Forgotten 44, which is about the victims of serial sex killer Earl Nelson, one of whom was my own ancestor, my introduction is 2 and a bit pages long, and it actually explains how I came to discover that my ancestor was one of his victims and why I then read the book, and also to say what my approach is, which was to ignore all the other books written before, exclusively written by men who go into the grisly details of the sex crimes. I wanted to give a voice to the victims. I wanted to say what lovely women and girls they were, what lives they lived, and what happened to their families afterwards. So I explain that's what you're going to find in this book. And then I talk about the serial killer you are about to meet, and I hope that will draw them in as well. Oh, we're going to find out about him, even if he's at the very back of the book, which is where he belongs. The important people in the story are these incredibly brave women and girls, and a couple of babies, by the way, who were murdered by him, but quite a significant number of them actually managed to beat him off and survive. So that's what I want people to know what's in the book. It's almost not quite a trigger warning, but just to let them know this isn't going to be too grisly. And it's more about not celebrating, but highlighting the victims and actually getting their names right, which most previous authors haven't done. So that's the kind of thing I like to do.
Yeah. And how do you decide when you write your non-fiction what you do put at the beginning? How do you, once you've written your introduction, how do you decide what follows?
Well, if it's a one-off crime, I would actually try and start with, at midnight on the 4th of December, 1927, 2 men crept towards a house and murdered somebody. And then I'd go through who were they? Why were they there? What happened afterwards? Was there an investigation? Was there a trial? With this particular one, because there are 44 victims and survivors, I've done it chronologically. I've started by building the background because this was San Francisco in the Jazz Age. And I've talked about the fact that women were experiencing a lot of new freedoms. Hemlines were going up and women were bobbing their hair and all this. And there was this fancy jazz music you could dance to. It was a complete change of scene from the end of the previous century. But also women couldn't get work. So most women, if they were widowed or they needed extra money, they could rent out a room in their house. And that was what attracted the killer. He just had to see a room for rent sign and he would go in, and in what other circumstance would a lone woman invite a man not only into a home but take him to an unoccupied bedroom and there be murdered. So
Wow.
that's setting the scene and also talking about what life was like in San Francisco. And his first victim was a 12-year-old girl. So I bring that in and suddenly the horror is there, I think. And then we just go along in chronological order because this guy was on a 2-year odyssey. He went up and down the California coast, then all across America from city to city murdering, and then up into Canada where he met my ancestor. And so I'm actually following his journey. It's a murdering journey. And hopefully that's, having said that, I've sent this to so many publishers who've said, oh, wonderful research, unique story, very, very good, very well written, but it's not for us.
Yeah.
So that's driven me mad. And the sad thing is next June is the centenary of Emily's death. And I was kind of hoping that I would have it out there. I mean, I've self-published it,
Yeah,
But it's just very difficult, isn't it? What do they want? Blood.
I know.
Well, I think you must definitely bring that on April the 26th. I can see lots of people wanting to buy that.
Oh, thanks, Beth. I hope so.
Absolutely. Now, Beth and Esther, you write, Denise, do you write short stories?
I have done. I used to be in a writers group where we did every month had to write a short story. And the good thing about that is several of those short stories I developed into novels.
Ah, handy. Um, Beth, we'll start with you. Short story, because you've written novels and short stories, collections of short stories. How do you get a hook in a short story? Are there any of yours that spring to mind? Because you read some out on Saturday.
That's right, yes. And generally, I tend to start my short stories on quite a low key because I know within a couple of paragraphs that I can ramp them up.
Mm.
I did find an exception in my preparation. No, it's not an exception. It's an example. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
So, this is actually for a piece of flash fiction, and it starts. Doris stepped onto the tube train. It was a new one, without the usual jostling of people and fug of cigarette smoke, etc., etc. And so it's the first paragraph is very ordinary, and so of course, in a
Yeah,
short
I
space
like the
of time, you realize that this is a tube journey on a historically significant day in which he's going to play a small part. But
mm.
um, yeah,
We've
um,
already got something unusual because it's a new train. And so and I like the fact because also sometimes especially in a short story, occasionally in a novel, if you give us the character's name as the first word, you're introducing us to the character. So
mhm.
we know by her name that perhaps she's a lady of a certain age, and that this story is going to be about her. Esther, how do you start your children's books? Do you start with a character's name?
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
going on a journey, and yeah.
yeah.
And how
Just
about
so they're there straight away in the reader's mind. Yeah.
and do you find with your going to veer off slightly with your titles for your short story or your children's books? Do they? How do you find your titles for your stories, Esther? Do you write them and then something in them you think, oh yes, actually that would make a good title, or do you come up with your title ahead of time, or does it vary?
Yeah, it varies. Sometimes I find it's not until I finished a short story, for example, that the title, um, suddenly comes to me. And sometimes I find it difficult to get the right title. And then it might be when I've stepped away and doing something like washing up. Ah, that's a good title because your mind works at it.
Mm.
But other times I've got something fixed in mind. It might be something, for example, I've heard a record, and I thought, oh, that's an interesting title, and then it gives me an idea and it comes from there. So it's all sorts of different things. So mm.
And how, Beth, your book is mindfulness. Coffee and Commute is mindfulness. Did you and you themed it because you've got notes, I think, at the end of each story, or
Yes,
yeah,
yes, that's right.
helpful.
And that's just to help the reader make choices. You assume that in an anthology they're going to pick different stories at different times rather than start at the beginning and work through.
Hmm.
Um, so yes, it's intended to be something for the right occasion. There's signposting in the themes, there's mood notes and introductions for each piece,
Hmm.
and then there's reflection points for each piece as well.
Hmm.
But interesting on titles, one of my writing groups, like Denise was saying, you have a theme every month and you write to the theme. Um, but it is remarkable how a group of 20 people can come up with remarkably different things. from one trigger, which sounds quite specific. Um, and I mean that's the wonder of taking part in writing groups, to not only explore your own creativity, but to receive other people's fresh ideas, which can be very different. Um, to give an example, one of the um, themes we had recently was lost keys. So there were keyboard, a typewriter which had lost its keys, piano keys, obviously physical keys, etc., etc. So there was a whole different interpretation of keys. And then unusually for me, because I'm normally quite literal, I went off on a complete tangent and wove the concept of lost keys into a retelling of a folk tale I knew from somewhere I used to live. So, yeah.
Nice. It is. That's the thing I love about teaching, is when I'd give them either the beginning of a sentence or just random words to put in, or components, or quite often sheets that would look a bit like ransom notes, but they'd have pictures and single words and phrases, or a little cutout blurb from the magazine, the newspaper Independent, on page 3. I don't know, I haven't bought it for a while, but they used to have little squares of about 30 words where it would lead you to another story later on, that it would be either a hook or a summary of something that had happened, and for more details turn to page something. So then you almost have a whole plot in a little square, and then some people would pick the same one as somebody else unintentionally, and it's always lovely to see how the brain goes off at tangents. Now, Denise, you write Cozy Crime, your new series, Cozy Crime, and obviously the poster behind you is espionage. Do you find once you've got your initial hook, then the pacing is different? That you have to be mindful of the genre that you're writing?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Sometimes when I'm writing the espionage fiction, I think there isn't enough tension in this, there isn't enough gore. Whereas it's so different with the cozy crime, and I actually find it therapeutic switching to cozy crime, because it's more gentle. And as I said to someone recently, if the police ever looked at my internet research history, they'd be horrified. Well, you're looking at different poisons and how they've act, and different means of killing people. So it's got to be much more gentle with the cozy crime. In fact, I'm looking at an idea at the moment where an old lady's found dead, and because of what they find in her bloodstream, they arrest somebody for her murder. And it might just turn out it was an accidental death, that she'd overdosed on something that she shouldn't have been taking orally anyway. So there's all kinds of different things where you don't want any dismemberment or anything like that. And sometimes when I read someone's novel where they've really gone to town on the brutality and the bloodshed, I think, oh, that's really put me off. So when I'm writing the cozy crime, the pace is different. You've still got to make sure you have the story arc, the rising tension, the obstacles, all the usual things. But at the same time, it's more gentle. You have a lot of over 55s sitting in a coffee shop trying to solve a crime, and the vicar gets involved, and people like that. And because my characters in my cozy crime are members of my U3A group, but all their names have been changed. So I can visualize the characters in my head, and everything that they do is connected with the project that we've all been working on. And so that sets the pace and the tone. But then when I get a bit bored with that, I go back to a bit of espionage fiction where somebody meets a horrible end under a train at St Pancras Station, something like that.
And isn't it therapeutic? And I bet nobody goes, "Oh, I bet you killed me off."
No, it's quite funny actually,
They'd
because
rather be the nice person.
definitely. And as you know, my latest cozy crime, Murder at the Festival, is something of a therapy book,
Yes.
where I killed a couple of people I really would like to kill.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Esther, do you alternate between writing children's and short stories, or does it depend on you set yourself a deadline and you're
Yeah, I'm also doing some writing workbooks, as well. So I've got one of those coming out as well quite soon. So, I'm doing that and then the children's, but I also, because of doing all the tutoring and, so it's sort of busy, and it is nice to have the break. And I don't think I could be a writer who just did one genre. I like a break to do something else. And also, I think it's quite nice, especially doing something. I mean, the children's are short anyway, but again, the short stories are even shorter. And I quite like sometimes, like I know, Morgan, you do the 50 word, sort of competitions, and they're good to do something really bite size. And it's quite nice. And I even do things like readers' letters, and just to break things up, it's quite nice. So I don't know about yourselves, Denise and Beth, doing longer, forms of writing, whether you like to have that break, and obviously you do different genres, as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's good to have that.
Beth, do you read different genres? Do you find, because
I
we
do.
touched on genres earlier on, and obviously I sort of compare Catherine Cookson to James Patterson, where Catherine Cookson you're going to have a lot because they're historical and often set in places like workhouses, where contemporary readers, and even if you read a lot of that genre, you like all the detail, you like the clothing and the environment, whereas you have sort of find a fine balance between telling the reader so much that they know everything to leaving some to their imagination. Do you find, not necessarily whether the beginning hooks you, but it's a different reading experience from the start of a book, depending on the genre?
Yes, it is, and I do like to vary what I read. In fact, I suppose at any one time I might have two or three books on the go because I will be looking for a quick read which I can finish and get some satisfaction out of. And certainly when I've got my teeth into a big fantasy book, um, or historical novel, you do find that there will be points where you just need to leave it for a while, and go off and read something else and come back to it. Uh, I mean, it's rare that you get a book that's kind of 500 to 900 pages where it's a complete page turner. You're always wanting to get to the next bit.
Mm.
I think if one of those were ever written, then and some people do say that they read Lord of the Rings in one sitting, but I mean, it would take you days if
Well,
you're reading mindfully rather than skimming.
yeah, I read the only James Patterson I've read in one go is Step on a Crack with his collaboration with Michael Letwidge, and I read it from start to finish in one go, and they're because they're not very big books, they're about 70,000 words, and it was exhausting because he has on average 140 chapters per book, and and the end of a chapter, as we know, has to have some kind of hook, or you're about to reveal something, or that something's been revealed, and what does it mean? And at the end, because he tends to go from detective to villain to detective to villain. So at the end of each chapter, you're, oh, okay, and then you're switching to the villain or the detective, and then there's a hook at the end of that, and and then you've got to go another two chapters, get through the next chapter to find out what that meant. And I was like this all the time through the whole book, which is great because it's a page turner and I want to know what's happening, but it was exhausting.
Mhm.
Esther, um, do you have a favourite first line of a book?
As in one that I've read.
One that you've read?
Yeah.
Yes.
Not that comes to mind immediately, but I do, that there are. I think one I was thinking of that I particularly liked, and I know I've used the book, just to when I've been sort of teaching about openings, in a novel, and that was Matt Haig's The Midnight Library,
Okay.
and just how, you with that it seems quite sort of ordinary at first, but things aren't quite right, and then it's got a yeah, a great sort of last line that sort of hooks you in. So, but that's sort of more like it's over 2 pages.
Right.
So that sort of hooks you. But I can't think of
Yeah.
a sort of killer first line. I'm sure there have been, that's very effective, that sort of shocks you and makes you think, oh, I've got to read this,
Yeah. I
So,
think that's the thing, isn't it, about beginnings? You've either got to be intrigued, or
yeah.
there is, as Denise says, most crime novels, or certainly detective novels, there's a dead body.
Mm.
And I say it. I did a talk for the WI the other day, and I said about openings and crime novels, and I said and beginning of a crime novel, you usually get a dog walker finding a body, and I said I shouldn't say this, but I'm a dog walker, not professionally, but I've had dogs pretty much ever since I left home, and I'm yet to find a body, which is very disappointing. But aren't they always dog walkers? And so yeah, I think it's the reader. There has to be some reason why the reader would want to read on. So in George Orwell's case, sorry to steal, if that was your one and only beginning, Beth, to steal your beginning. The clock's striking 13. But there's got to be something. Either the dead body, who is the dead body, who killed that person, or there's something unusual. Why is it? And give us some kind of hook. Denise, are you ever mindful of the starts of your chapters? Because obviously the ends of chapters either have to have some kind of because you've got to read on.
Yeah.
Do you? I mean, it's too throwing you in at the deep end to say. Do you then continue with the reveal, or think that there's switched to something else, as James Patterson does? But do you ever think, well, even though it's not the beginning of the book, it's the beginning of a chapter, I still need some kind of hook at the beginning of the chapter?
Not necessarily, because I think if you've ended with a nice hook at the end of the chapter, for example, my main character, Carol Murray, who's a retired intelligence analyst, she or the detective in the case might say, so you might end up with something like Carol wondered what on earth the next lot of inquiries would throw up. And then the next chapter goes to that Thursday afternoon, and the detective conducted an interview with the guy that Carol was convinced was the murderer.
Right.
And so hopefully they're thinking, yes, come on, tell us in this chapter what it's going to throw up. So I think I tend to do that. And it's interesting the point you made about first line hooks. I think it would be too much to have one in every chapter. My favourite one is, I think, Dickens, where he says it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. He kind of sets the scene in one sort of line. But what I like best of all as a line is I forgot what you call it now, it's a strap line, isn't it? You get sort of strap lines and log lines with films. For example, the best of all time, I think, is the Alien, where it says, in space, no one can hear you scream.
Yeah.
So you know exactly what you're going to get. And I try to put a bit of a log line or strap line on my books. And the latest one I'm looking at is on a cozy crime book is going to be Dead Men Don't Eat Hobnobs.
I love it.
I
Chocolate
think,
hobnobs. Tim's favourite, chocolate hobnobs.
yeah, funnily enough, it's my vicar's favourite, and
Okay.
he's the one who gets murdered.
Oh,
So, or he may be murdered. We'll have to
right.
wait and see.
Okay.
But so I think that's the kind of line I like. Just put it on the cover, have a
Yeah.
little strap line on there.
Yeah.
And I'm sure even if you're writing children's fiction, Alfie's day out turns bad or something like that. Because I used to love the Annie Rose and Alfie books. I've forgotten the name of the author, children's author. I used to read them to my daughter. We're going back 30 odd years now. And that it was just lovely. It was little scenarios that do happen to children. Things like Alfie's mum pops out and he's locked in, and somebody comes to the door and it's quite urgent, and he has to try and get the door open, and or the the window cleaner manages to stop a burglary next door, and Alfie gets involved. And I just love that kind of thing.
Because there still
But
has to be
yeah,
conflict, doesn't there? But nothing
yeah, nothing too horrible.
scary that, yes. Oh, how lovely. Beth, do you have another opening as I stole yours that you
Well, it's another George Orwell one from A Clergyman's Daughter. Again, a fairly ordinary start, but the words here are particularly good. As the alarm clock on the chest of drawers exploded like a horrid little bomb of bell metal, Dorothy, wrenched from the depths of some complex, troubling dream, awoke with a start and lay on her back, looking into the darkness in extreme exhaustion.
Mm.
It's his only novel with a female protagonist,
Okay.
and
Wow.
yes, it wasn't even his favorite. He hated it, but
Did he?
I think it's worth rereading.
Right. Well, I used to know Alan when I lived in Northampton. I knew Alan Moore, who'd written The Extraordinary League of Gentlemen and Watchmen and V for Vendetta and all of those. And he obviously he loved his books, and everybody loves his books, but he did not approve of the film versions of. No, you don't mention film versions of his books to Alan Moore. But my favourite, following on from the exploding, my favourite opening is "It Was the Day My Grandmother Exploded," which is Ian Banks' Crow Road, and I didn't know, I'd just heard that along the way, and then I saw the TV series with a very young Peter Capaldi, and they're in the courtyard of they've just buried that were just gone to the funeral service of his grandmother, and the undertakers have forgotten to take her pacemaker out, and you hear this explosion and a puff of smoke coming out of the crematorium, and then it's just sort of backstory thereafter about him and his family and so on. But yeah, that's always stuck in my brain. And I think there's the beginning of Kate Atkinson's first book, the behind the scenes of the museum, is "I exist!" exclamation mark. Something a
I
bit.
once wrote a short story where I was writing it from the murder victim's point of view, and my opening line was something like, "It was a rainy day, the day I was murdered." And I thought maybe that would hook people in, well, how's she writing this story if she was murdered?
Yes. No, absolutely. Well, that reminds me of a film, DOA, with Dennis Quaid, where he's found out he's been poisoned and he's got 24 hours to find out who poisoned him. There we
So
go.
it's a slow poisoning, is it? He's got it takes 24 hours to work.
Yes.
It's a
Yeah.
bit like the guy who was poisoned by the Russians in London, wasn't he? I've forgotten his name.
Levinenko.
Yeah, and he was being interviewed by the police for quite a while until he succumbed to his poison. And he was able to describe how he'd had tea in that hotel with the two Russians, and they'd slipped it in his tea. Rice, was it ricin or
Right then would have been.
something similar?
Yeah.
Mm.
Wow. Wow. So Beth, what are you working on now?
I should be working on the sequel to Heroes and Traitors, which is called Power and Puppetry. I keep getting distracted from it to do short pieces for various projects. There's one in Marlow at the moment around the park, and so I did promise to do something for that for the museum.
Hmm.
So that would be a short piece. And also I've got hooked back into a textbook which a former co-author is piloting. So lots of things on the go.
Good. Nice. Good variety. Esther, how about you? What are you working on at the moment?
Yeah, all sorts of things, yeah, I've got the workbook coming out, children's book coming out, so working on those, but also lots of other editing projects for
Right.
people, for authors and teaching. So there's, yeah, plenty to keep me busy. So
Good. Good. And Denise? What are your latest?
Working on quite a lot of things. I've finished two more espionage novels, just waiting to do something with them because my publisher went out of business, as you know.
Yeah.
And I'm working on a new American series with an FBI agent. I've written two draft novels on that one. But the thing I'm really enjoying at the moment is book 3 in my cozy crime series, which is called The Three Church Mystery.
Right.
And again, just like Beth, I keep getting so distracted. There's all kinds of other bits of research and things on the go. So
Have you got any of
it's
your
tricky.
Denise, you are so productive. I mean, it's phenomenal. I'm full of admiration.
I think it's obsessive, actually.
Right.
have you got either of your first two covered? Because I love the simplicity of your latest books.
Mine, yes.
Yeah.
This is the I went to try and make them look like the old-fashioned paperbacks. So this is the first one. And with Cozy Crime, you don't have a graphic image of a body on there. You know, you have sort of hand-drawn things.
Mm.
So that's the first one. And the second one, just out of reach, Murder at the Festival. So I've got a chap in a spotlight with a gun because somebody gets murdered when they're putting a little play on at a crime writing festival. So again, it's got the nice matte feel and it's very old-fashioned looking.
Mm.
And
'Cause
my
I think
third one will be similar, but red.
because I think you often find that there'll be a top author come out with a new design of cover, like Richard Osman, dare I say. And so then all of a sudden, a lot of the books come out with a similar, with the white background and the border and
Yeah.
the motif in the middle. And why not?
Mhm.
He's done really well with those. And it's interesting you were saying earlier on that that the books get better. There was a nameless author that books get better in the series because quite often when I'm doing WIs, the Richard Osman will come up, the Thursday Murder Club will come up in conversation, and it surprised me anyway, how many of the ladies said, "Oh no, didn't like it." And especially there was
Yeah.
one, I think it was about a year ago, the one that came out about a year ago, said it's enjoyed the ones up to that, but didn't enjoy the ones thereafter. But Tim and I love his Richard Osman's House of Games.
Hmm.
And it was announced, I think, last week, beginning of last week, that he was going to stop doing them, presumably in favour of writing.
Hmm.
And so we were both a bit gutted because we've still got loads to catch up on. But I found out yesterday when I googled it that it's going to become the Martin Sheen House of Games.
Is it Michael Sheen, is it?
Michael Sheen, sorry, not
Yeah.
Martin Sheen.
Mhm.
Michael Sheen, House of Games. I think he's brilliant. I think he'd be
Mhm.
perfect for it. It'll be interesting to see how that goes.
But it's funny you mentioned covers and things, and I'm giving a talk actually at the Chalfont St Giles Literary Festival on it's called Cozy Crime, a Cottage Industry,
Mm.
where I look at all the different kinds of cozy crime, from the Marlowe Murder Club to the Thursday Murder Club, and lots of other different. You know, there are all kinds of cozy crime series by
Mm.
authors who, like for example, there's a mother and toddler group where the exhausted mums get together for coffee and solve murders. And then there's all the religious ones, you know, Father Brown, Sister Boniface, all of these.
Mm.
And so I'm giving a presentation all about the different kinds of cozy crime and pointing out that whilst there aren't any real rules, there are conventions, and one is the covers. But the exception is, you know, if you look at all of the Osmonds and the Robert Thorogood and everyone who's written cozy crime, it's all the same, you know, with a bit of a drawing on the front.
Mm.
Except when they become made into TV series or films, the publishers have to redo them with the film stars on the front. It's
Yes.
got to have Helen Mirren or Ben Kingsley or someone like that because it sells more books. It's
Yes.
funny, isn't it?
It is. It is. Yes, because Lee Child had the silhouette. His were very, apart from the fact that a third of the book is his name at the beginning,
Mhm.
at the top, but then he just has the generic silhouette. And then Alan Richardson, I think his name is,
Mhm.
the TV series is for me, he's the Jack Reacher. Brilliant.
It's funny you talk about the name at the top, because obviously the protocol is that only best-selling authors have their name at the top.
Mm.
And I always put my name at the bottom when I was self-publishing initially. And when I was taken up by Spellbound Books, they said, no, you've got to have your name at the top now because you've sold 2 number ones.
Yeah,
So technically you're a bestseller.
yeah,
So I'm being very cheeky now and put my name at the top,
you're
although not
right.
in really big letters.
No, but absolutely. Well, the thing is, if people, especially if you're writing a series, people like the first one, and they know and this is the whole point of doing these panels and the author spotlights, is that we are nice people. We write books that we are proud of and fond of. And it is, we would like to get to the point where, oh, great, she's got another book out. Don't care what it is, because I really like her, I really like her or him, his writing, their writing, and they buy the book because it's you, not because it looks interesting.
Well, it's really nice. I had a phone call from our local bookshop the other day in Gerrards Cross, and they said a lady came in and said she's read the first 2 books in your Cozy Crime series. She wants the third. So I had to say, could you tell her I haven't finished writing it
Yeah.
yet? I was really chuffed. I know it's only a small thing, but I was absolutely chuffed to
Oh no,
bits.
absolutely. Too right. And the great thing about self-publishing is that you don't have to wait for it to go through all those hoops, including the
Absolutely.
marketing.
And you can
Yeah,
design your own covers, which I really enjoy doing. So
yes.
you
Do
don't
you
get dictated to.
have you set yourself a deadline for that one?
I should have done,
The next one,
because I haven't got a deadline. I've been what the Germans call a faulenzer. I've just been
right?
slobbing about, going on Facebook,
Yeah.
chatting to people, and I should be. I plan to finish it this weekend, but I'm only
Great.
37,000 words in, so
Okay,
it's not
that's
going to get
okay.
finished.
I was going to say that is a tough ask to have that done.
That
But
have to be next weekend.
yes, absolutely.
That would
Well,
be
in time,
nice.
yeah, in time for Chalfont St Giles, if not for Self Pub Fest.
Yes,
That'll be good.
that would
Anyway,
be
I
good.
look forward to seeing you there, all 3 of you,
Mm,
in
lovely.
2 weeks and 6 days.
Mm,
Thank you for joining me today. It's been brilliant. So thank you, Beth. Thank you, Esther. Thank you, Denise.
thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
lovely. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks. Bye.